evening. I hope you will hear me well. My name is Vlad, and I'm a member of the Department of International Business and Economics here at the Academy of Economic Studies, Bucharest, which is our post at this moment. And I am also president of the Ludwig von Mises Institute, Romania. And it is a great joy for me to be in the position to introduce to you Professor Hans-Hermann Hoppe. And I was just told that yesterday in this room, Jeffrey Franks from the International Monetary Fund gave a talk. So let's say this room needs therapy. Professor Hoppe is with us on the occasion of the Romanian translation of his book, A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism, translation done by Professor Emanuel Mihai Socaciu from the Department of Philosophy at the University of Bucharest. Professor Hoppe was born on September the 2nd, 1949 in West Germany. He attended the Universität des Saarlandes in Saarbrücken and the Goethe Universität in Frankfurt. And then the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and he studied philosophy, sociology, history, and economics. He earned his PhD in philosophy in 1974 and his habilitation in sociology and economics in 1981, both from the Goethe Universität in Frankfurt. He taught at several German universities, as well as at the Johns Hopkins University, the Bologna Center for Advanced International Studies in Bologna, Italy. In 1986, he moved from Germany to the United States to study under Murray Rothbard. He remained a close associate of Rothbard until his death in January 1995. He's an Austrian school economist and libertarian philosopher, and he has until recently been professor of economics at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. He is distinguished fellow with the Ludwig von Mises Institute. He's founder and president of the Property and Freedom Society, initiated in 2006. And he's the editor-at-large of the Journal of Libertarian Studies. And his works include such classics as I'm sure most of you know these titles: Democracy, The God That Failed, The Economics and Ethics of Private Property, A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism, the book we are having as a pretext for our meeting, Economic Science and the Austrian Method. He has some books previously written in German, but I will not venture to pronounce the titles. And he also edited The Myth of National Defense, Essays in the Theory and History of Security Production. Let me end this short presentation of Professor Hoppe by inviting, challenging you to read his books. As one of his most bright followers puts it, I have in mind Stefan Kinsella, read Hoppe and then nothing is the same. So, please welcome Professor Hans-Hermann Hoppe.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you all for coming. I will attempt to tell you everything you need to know about politics, money, and banking in about 30 to 40 minutes. I think you don't need to know much more. Imagine that you are in command of the state. You are the head of state. And the state is defined as an institution that possesses a territorial monopoly of ultimate decision-making, is the ultimate judge in every case of conflict, including conflicts involving the state and its agents itself. If one state employee has a complaint against a private citizen, then it is again a state employee who decides who is right and who is wrong. And by implication, as a second defining mark of a state, the state has the right, or rather the privilege, to tax on a certain territory. That is, he can unilaterally, without consent, determine the price that his subjects must pay to perform the task of ultimate decision-making. Now, let's leave aside the question of how such a wondrous institution could ever have come into existence. It is sufficient if I simply point out that this took several hundred years, but it definitely did. We do have a state that can do these things that I just described, and its continued existence today seems assured by the fact that most, if not all, people nowadays think of the state as an indispensable and unquestionably good institution, or at the very least, as a necessary evil with the emphasis on necessary. And assume further that you are the head of the state, that you are not an angel and not a saint, but you are a regular person with normal human motives and desires. In particular, that you are a person that prefers more wealth over less, and that is rather richer than poorer. Now, to act under these constraints, or rather under this lack of constraints, is what constitutes politics and political action. And it should be clear from the outset that politics then, by its very nature, always means mischief. Not from the point of view, of course, from your point of view, or who is in charge of the state, but mischief from the point of view of those that are subject to your rule as ultimate judge. Predictably, you will use your position as the ultimate judge in all cases of conflict to enrich yourself at other people's expense. Rather than preventing and resolving conflict, you will cause and provoke conflict and then solve it by consistently deciding it in your own favor. You hit somebody on the head, so to speak, the person then complains, and then you say, I'm the ultimate judge, I'm of course right, you provoked me, and so that's the end of the story. Now, you may not be able to do whatever you please, but because occasionally you run into resistance on the part of your victims, but as long as the necessity of state rule is held to be beyond any serious doubt in public opinion, you will be a permanent mischief maker, always trying to further enrich yourself at other people's expense. More specifically, based on these very sparse assumptions that I made, we can predict in particular what your attitude and policy vis-à-vis money and banking will be. Assume that you rule over a territory that has developed beyond the stage of a primitive barter economy, and where a common medium of exchange, that is, money, is in use. First off, it is easy to see why you would be particularly interested in money and in monetary affairs. As a state ruler, you can in principle confiscate whatever you want to provide yourself with an unearned income. But instead of confiscating various producer goods or various consumer goods, you will naturally prefer to confiscate money, because money is the most easily saleable and most widely saleable of all goods. And so in having possession of money, this allows you the greatest possible freedom to spend your income as you happen to like it, on the greatest variety of goods. First and foremost then, the taxes that you impose on society will be money taxes, whether on property or on income. And you will want to maximize your money tax revenues that you can get. Now, in this attempt to maximize your money income, you will, however, quickly encounter some rather intractable difficulties. Eventually, your attempts to further increase your tax income will encounter resistance in that higher tax rates will not lead to higher but to lower tax revenue. That is to say, if you tax people at 90% of their income, you might actually collect less tax revenue than if the rate of taxation had been only 50 or 40%. Your income that you can spend, your spending money, declines because producers which are burdened with increasingly higher tax rates will simply produce less. Now, in this situation, you only have one other option to further increase or at least maintain your current level of spending, namely by borrowing such funds. And for that, you must go to banks. And hence, your special interest also in banks and the banking industry. If you borrow money from banks, these banks will automatically take an active interest in your future well-being. They will want you to stay in business. That is, they want the state to go on in its exploitation business. And since banks tend to be major players in every economy, such support from the side of the banks is certainly beneficial for you. On the other hand, as a negative, if you borrow money from banks, you are not only expected to pay back the loan that you received, but you're also expected to pay an interest on top of it. The question then that arises is, for you as a ruler, how can I free myself of these two constraints? The first constraint of tax resistance in the form of falling tax revenues if you try to raise the tax rate, and the other constraint of the need of having to borrow from banks and pay interest to banks. Now, it is not too difficult to see what the ultimate solution to your problem is. And given what the ultimate solution is, it also becomes quickly apparent what intermediate steps you must take from whatever happens to be the starting point from which your operation starts, so to speak, in order to reach your ultimate goal. Now, you can reach the desired independence of taxpayers and of tax payments and of banks if only you establish yourself first as a territorial monopolist of the production of money. On your territory, you determine only I am permitted to produce money. Now, this is not sufficient yet, however, because as long as money would be a regular good that must be expensively produced, such as gold or silver, for instance, there is nothing in it for you except expenses. You must now produce the money yourself. More importantly then, you must use your monopoly position as the only one that can produce money in a given territory to lower the production cost of money and the quality of money as close as possible to zero. Instead of producing quality money, such as gold and silver, in an expensive way, you must see to it that worthless pieces of paper that can be produced at practically zero cost must take the place of costly quality money such as gold and silver. Now, normally, of course, no one would accept worthless pieces of paper as payment for anything. Pieces of paper become acceptable as payment only insofar as they are titles to something else. That is, insofar as they are titles to pieces of real property. This is how people initially were ever only willing to accept a piece of paper, because it was not just a piece of paper. It was entitling you to something else. In other words, then, you must replace pieces of paper that were initially titles to genuine money with pieces of paper that are titles to absolutely nothing. Now, under competitive conditions, that is to say, if everyone could produce paper money, that is, if everyone were free to produce this product, a money that can be produced at almost zero cost would be produced up to a quantity where marginal revenue, in economic terms, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And since the marginal cost of producing an additional piece of money are zero, the marginal revenue, that is what you could buy for a piece of paper, would also drop to zero. Hence, the necessity to monopolize the power of printing, of creating paper money. No one else is allowed to do it in order to prevent this hyperinflation from taking place. So you must monopolize it in order to restrict the supply of paper money, in order to avoid hyperinflation, which under competitive conditions would be almost immediately arise. And with hyperinflation, of course, people would then flee back into real values and the money would become entirely useless. And you must be especially jealous to protect your monopoly position as the only one who can produce money, the more worthless the money is that you happen to produce. Now, in a way, you have then accomplished what all alchemists and their sponsors wanted to achieve. You all know what the alchemists wanted to do. They wanted to produce something valuable out of something that had no value at all. And what you have achieved by having a paper money monopoly is you have produced something that has value, that purchases indeed something out of something that is entirely worthless, namely just pure pieces of paper. And just as alchemists, if they had accomplished this miracle of producing something valuable out of something that had no value at all, had to keep this secretly, this way of producing secretly, otherwise other people would imitate it, and then of course the alchemists would no longer be in the position that they were before. So you as a money producer must make sure, since you cannot keep the recipe of producing paper money secretly, that no one else can possibly do the same thing that you can do, namely producing the same types of pieces of paper. Now, if you have monopolized the production of money in a conscious cost-cutting effort, so to speak, having reduced the production cost and the quality of money virtually to zero, you have made a marvelous accomplishment. Unless you are a saint, that is under the assumption that you are a normal person, you can and will now and forever print more money whenever you are in need for it. After all, it costs almost nothing to print it, and you can then turn around and buy yourself something really valuable, such as a house or a Mercedes for your paper. And you can achieve these wonders not just for yourself, but also for your friends and acquaintances, of which you all of a sudden discover that you have far more than you ever dreamed before. Including, of course, many or even most economists who explain then to the general public why your monopoly money-producing position is really good for everyone. Now, what are the effects of this? First and foremost, more paper money does not in the slightest affect the quantity or quality of all other non-monetary goods. There are just as many goods as before. There exist just as many consumer goods as before, and there exist just as many producer goods as before. Now, this immediately refutes the notion that is apparently held by most, if not all, mainstream economists, that more money can somehow increase social wealth. To believe this, as everyone proposing a so-called easy money policy as an efficient and socially responsible way out of economic trouble apparently does, is to believe in magic, that stones, or rather paper, can be turned into bread. Let me emphasize again that practically every mainstream economist who advocates that we should increase the supply of money in order to get out of the current financial and economic crisis is the person who believes in miracles. That tells you something about the quality of these people. Rather, what the additional money to print it up will affect are two things. On the one hand, money prices will of course be higher than they otherwise would be, and the purchasing power, what you can buy for a unit of money, will be less. Or in short, what we will get is we will get inflation. And secondly, and more importantly, all the while the greater amount of money does not increase the total amount of presently existing wealth in society, that is, the total quantity of all goods that exist, it redistributes the existing wealth in society in favor of you and your friends. Those people who get the money first and spend the money first can still buy at the old low prices. And then prices are gradually driven up because the money supply has increased. And those people who get the money very late, or not at all, to whom it flows very late after the money is just moving from one person to another, so to speak, all those people receive no less in terms of wealth. If you have been on a fixed income, for instance, you are faced with a situation where all prices have gone up in the meantime, but your income, which was fixed, has remained the same. So those who get the money first become richer, relatively speaking, and those who receive the new money later or not at all are impoverished. So again, to emphasize, an increase in the total supply of money can never make a society richer. All it can do is redistribute existing wealth from one group of people to another group of people, and always from the group of people who get the money first, they are richer, and those people who get the money last, they are impoverished as a result of it. Now the problem for you and your friends, again, you are a head of state, for you and your friends with this institutional setup is not that it doesn't work. It works perfectly. It works always to your own and your friends' advantage and always at the expense of others. All you have to do is to avoid hyperinflation. Because if there's hyperinflation, then people will stop using money altogether. There will be a flight into real values, and then your magic wand that you can create riches for you at least out of nothing will be taken from you. The problem with your paper money monopoly, if there is one at all, is only that this fact will be immediately noticed also by others and recognized as a big criminal ripoff that it in fact is. But this problem, that people will notice that you are up to no good, can be overcome too, if in addition to monopolizing the production of money, you also set yourself up as a banker and enter the banking business yourself with the establishment of a central bank, of a government bank. Because you can create paper money out of thin air, you can also create credit out of thin air. Credit is nothing else but paper money loaned out with the expectation of being returned plus interest. In fact, because you can create credit out of thin air, that is, without any savings on your own part, you can offer loans at cheaper interest rates than anyone else can do it. Even at interest rates as low as 0. And with this ability, not only is your former dependency on banks and the banking industry eliminated, moreover, you can make banks now dependent on you, and you can forge a permanent alliance and complicity between banks and state. You don't even have to become involved in the business of investing the credit yourself. That task and the risk involved in that, you can leave easily to the private banks. What you and your central bank need to do is only this. You create credit out of thin air, and then loan this money at below market interest rates to commercial banks. Instead of you paying interest to banks, banks now pay interest to you, to your central bank. And the banks in turn loan out your newly created credit to their business friends at somewhat higher, but still below market interest rates, and they earn them from the interest differential. And in addition, to make the banks especially keen to cooperate with you, to work together with you, you may permit the banks a certain amount of their own new credit. You allow them to create money on top of the money that you created. You allow the banks to expand credit above and beyond of the credit that you have created out of thin air. This is what we call fractional reserve banking. Now, what are the consequences of this monetary policy? To a large extent, they are the same as the ones that I described with respect to an easy money policy. First, an easy credit policy is also inflationary. More money is brought into circulation, and prices will be higher, and the purchasing power of money will be lower than would have been the case otherwise. And second, the credit expansion too has no effect on the quantity or quality of all goods that are currently in existence. This is all the same as in the first example that I gave. Again, more money is just, this is just more paper, nothing more. It does not increase and cannot increase social wealth by one iota. Third, easy credit also engenders a systematic redistribution of social wealth in favor of you, that is the central bank, and the commercial banks within your banking cartel that you established. You will receive an interest return on money that you have created practically at zero cost out of thin air, instead of on money that you costly saved out of the given income. This is the way we do it, normal people do it. And so do the banks, who earn an additional interest on your costless money loans. Both you and your banker friends thereby appropriate what we may call an unearned income. You and the banks are enriched at the expense of all real money savers, who receive now a lower interest return than they otherwise would have received without this injection of new credit. On the other hand, there also exists a fundamental difference between an easy print and spend monetary policy and an easy print and then loan out monetary policy. First off, an easy credit policy, that is print up and then loan out, alters the production structure, that is, it changes what is produced and by whom in a highly significant way. You, the chief of the central bank, can create credit out of thin air, as I said. You do not have to first save money out of your money income. That is, you do not have to cut your own expenses and thus abstain from buying certain non-money goods. This is, of course, what every normal person must do if he extends a credit. If I extend a credit to you, I must save out of my given income and then hand you over the savings. And the savings that I hand over to you represent goods that I have not bought myself, that I have not consumed or used. You only, central bankers, you only have to turn on the printing press and can thus undercut any interest rate that is otherwise demanded by savers of borrowers of money in the market. Granting credit does not involve any sacrifice on your part, which is why this institution, of course, is so nice from the point of view of governments, central banks, and you will be in charge of all of this. If things then go well, you will be paid a positive interest return on your paper money investment. And if they don't go well, as a monopoly producer of money, you can always make up losses more easily than anyone else, namely by covering your losses with even more printed paper. Without costs, and no genuine personal risk of losses, then you can grant credit essentially indiscriminately to everyone and for any purpose, without concern for the creditworthiness of the debtor or the soundness of his business plan. Because of your easy credit, certain people, in particular investment bankers, who otherwise would not be deemed sufficiently creditworthy, and certain projects, in particular projects undertaken by banks and their main clients, that would not be considered profitable or too risky, instead do now get credit and do get funding. Essentially, the same also applies to the commercial banks within your banking cartel, because of their special relationship with you as a central bank, and as the first recipients of your costless, low-interest paper money loans, credits. The banks too can offer loans to prospective lenders at interest rates below market interest rates. And if things go well, again, they earn an unearned income, receive an interest return. And if they don't go well, they can rely on you as the central banker, as the monopolistic producer of money, that you will bail them out in the same way as you bail yourself out of any financial trouble, namely by more paper money production. Accordingly, the banks too will be indiscriminate in their selection of their clients and their business plans, and more prone to funding the wrong people and the wrong projects. And there's a second significant difference between a print and spend policy and a print and then loan out policy. And this difference explains why the income and wealth redistribution in your and your banker friends' favor that is set in motion by easy credit policies takes a specific form of a temporal boom-bust cycle that is of an initial phase of seeming general prosperity or of expected increases in future incomes and future wealth, which is then followed by a phase of widespread impoverishment when the prosperity of the boom period is revealed as a widespread illusion. Now, this boom-bust feature is a logical and physically necessary consequence of credit created out of thin air, unbacked by any savings, or as economists sometimes refer to this, by fiduciary credit as compared to commodity credit. I can give you credit that has a form of real goods, or I can give you credit that just consists of pieces of paper unbacked by any real goods. The reason for the business cycle is as elementary as it is fundamental. Imagine Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe can give a loan consisting of fish, which he has not consumed, to Friday, the second person. Friday then can convert these savings, the fish that he received as a loan from Robinson, into a fishing net. He can eat the fish while he builds the net. With the net, he will be more productive as a fisherman than without a net. And this allows him to repay the loan to Robinson that he received. Robinson gets his fish back. It allows him to pay interest to Robinson. Robinson gets more fish than he loaned out initially. And Friday can still make a profit. That is, earn an additional fish that was made possible due to the higher productivity of working with the fishing net. So again, Friday in principle, because he receives a commodity loan, is in principle capable of repaying his loan to Robinson plus interest and still earn a profit of additional fish for himself. But this is all physically impossible if Robinson's loan is only a paper note denominated in fish. So he hands a note that says, this is entitling you to 1 fish. But Robinson has not saved up the fish. He extends to Friday a loan that consists in nothing else but a paper note where it says fish. So Robinson's loan is only a paper note denominated in fish, but unbacked by real fish savings. That is, if Robinson has no fish because he has consumed it all. Now then, and this is absolutely necessarily so, Friday must obviously fail in his investment endeavor. In a simple barter economy, of course, this becomes immediately apparent. Friday will simply not accept Robinson's note because he knows this is just a piece of paper. He would only accept it if it were real savings, a real loan, a commodity loan consisting of genuine fish. And because of this, is because of the fact that Friday notices in such a simple primitive economy immediately what is going on, there is no boom-bust cycle that is getting started. But in a complex monetary economy, the fact that credit was created out of thin air is not immediately noticeable. Every credit note looks exactly like every other credit note. And because of this, the notes are also accepted by the takers of credit. But all of this, of course, does not change the fundamental fact of reality that nothing can be produced out of nothing, and that investment projects that are undertaken without any real funding, that is, without any savings backing them, must fail. But it explains also why a boom, that is, an increased level of investment, accompanied by the expectation of higher future incomes and higher future wealth, can get started. Friday does accept the note instead of immediately refusing it because he cannot immediately recognize that there are no savings backing the note. And explains then why it takes a while until the physical reality, so to speak, reasserts itself and reveals such expectations as illusionary. But what little is the crisis to you? And you are in charge of this whole thing. Even if your path to riches is through repeated crises, brought about by your paper money regime and central bank policies, from your point of view, that is, from the viewpoint of the head of state and the chief of the central bank, this form of print and loan wealth redistribution in your own and your bankers' friends' favor while it is less immediate than the results that you achieve by engaging in a print and then immediately spend policy, is still much better from your point of view, much preferable from your point of view, because it is far more difficult to see through and recognize for what it actually is. Rather than coming across as a plain fraud and parasite, in pursuing an easy credit policy, you can even pretend that you are engaged in the selfless task of investing in the future rather than spending on present frivolities. And you can even pretend that you are healing economic crises rather than being the one who actually caused them. Even government deficits, which are financed by the sale of interest-bearing government bonds to commercial banks, or the general public, look like normal deficits and corporate bonds. The government must pay interest on its bonds, and it looks like it must productively invest its loans in order to do so. Yet in fact, the loans granted by commercial banks to governments are made possible only because your central bank first provides these banks with the necessary funds or reserves to then loan them back to the government. And in any case, the repayment of its loans plus interest can be always assured by your own central bank by producing still more money and credit in the future. So this is the world that we live in, and I'm telling you, it is a crazy world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hoppe. As I have told you, I'm also the president of the Ludwig von Mises Institute, Romania, and in this capacity, I would like to invite Professor Hoppe to become an honorary member of the Ludwig von Mises Institute, Romania, and I can tell you it has been arranged. He has accepted. From now on, it should go like this. Professor Hoppe will take a number of questions. We have about maybe even 20 minutes for questions. And at the end of it, as we have some books back there, there will also be a shorter or longer signing book session. Okay, so now for the Q&A session, there will be two mics walking around the room. You should raise your hand and maybe present yourself quickly if you find it useful. And we'll try to moderate this Q&A session. So the toughest moment, the first question.
So everything is clear.
I tried to have one. My name is Christian Baum, and I'm professor here of international finance in this institution. And a few days ago, a few weeks ago, I had a small dispute with my colleagues, discussing about the fact that commercial banks are private institutions or public institutions. If we take a look to the saving rates, and if you take a look to the efforts of commercial banks regarding grasping more and more savings from population, we can see that this activity was quite diminished in the last years. commercial banks being more interested to obtain financing, cheap money from financing, like cheap money from central bank. So my question is the following. Do you think that in this world, the commercial bank activities are related to the private market or to the public market? They are private or public institutions, commercial banks?
In a way, by having become a part of a banking cartel that is only made possible by the existence of a central bank, they have become, at least to a certain extent, public institutions and are no longer pure private institutions. The activity that banks engage in are to a large extent activities that in a free market would be considered to be illegal activities. And only public institutions can, of course, engage in such activities. What governments do in general is engage in activities that private citizens are not allowed to do. The government taxes you, that would be in the dealings between private citizens, would be considered to be stealing from you. Governments engage in activities like taxing and then redistributing income. In the dealings between private citizens, this activity would be called stealing and fencing of stolen goods. So what commercial banks do is they partly engage in activities that would also exist on the free market, and they take in the savings of savers and loan these savings out. But to a large extent, of course, they loan out things and earn interest on things that are not the result of anybody's savings, but of, in private law dealings, criminal activities undertaken by the central bank. So they cannot be clearly classified as falling into either this category or in that. They are a crazy mixture of both.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Until you warm up, I will have a question for Professor Hoppe. It is a big issue in Romania today, this the International Monetary Fund assistance that we might need. It is even supposed to be necessary in order for us not to get into deeper trouble or to get out of trouble. What will your opinion be on such an institution and such a type of assistance?
Because these institutions are also set up by governments in order to stand ready to bail out whoever needs to be bailed out of financial difficulties, which are the result of the same policies that all central banks all over the world pursue, and in which they are assisted by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. In a way, these institutions, what they do is always try to reward governments that have pursued a particularly bad economic policy and thereby assure that these miserable economic policies will be continued. The same thing that you see going on in the Greek case. If a normal firm would go bankrupt, what would they have to do? They would have to just cut the salaries of their employees. They would have to dismiss people, and if their liabilities exceed their assets, the governments would have to be entirely liquidated. all of the things that the governments own would have to be sold off into private hands. If that would happen, a miracle, an economic miracle would break out in Greece, because all the hundreds of thousands of public employees who currently produce things that nobody wants, that nobody is voluntarily willing to pay for, would for the first time in their life have to look for a productive occupation and stand on their own feet. Would have to join the productive population instead of being part of a parasitic class. That would be a short, big shock for Greece. But after half a year or a year, I think Greece would be out of this crisis. Institutions such as International Monetary Fund, World Banks, they are only set up in order to prevent precisely these things from happening. The bankruptcy of a state would be magnificent. Nobody ever would loan any money to an institution such as this. People who have done it once and are not being paid back their debts will not commit this same mistake once again. So the great effort undertaken to rescue Greece and then Spain and then Italy, in the end it will lead to a bankruptcy of Germany that is supposed to bail these guys out. And create an even bigger crisis, because once Germany declares bankruptcy, again, how will they solve this problem? They will solve this problem by printing even more money than they ever printed before, and by clamoring for instituting a world central bank, not just the US Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the European Central Bank. Now then they will demand we must have a world central bank issuing a world paper currency, because then we have unlimited abilities of creating money out of thin air. In the current world, the situation is still such that if the United States prints continuously in dollars, then the US dollar will fall in the currency market against other currencies. The EU, the euro, for instance. Europe is still controlled by the United States. Europe is, so to speak, a satellite of the United States. The European Central Bank takes orders from the Central Bank of the United States. Of course, they will not tell you that they do, but they do. But there are still some countries like China and so forth that are not dominated in this way. And there is, of course, a danger that if the euro continuously devalues and the US dollar devalues and the Chinese yuan will rise, that limits the ability of the United States and of the European countries to inflate at will. If all national currencies are abolished and there's only one world paper currency, then you will see inflation as you have never seen it before in your life. So all of these institutions, as far as I'm concerned, should be abolished. Money should be produced on the market like every other good, subject to supply and demand constraints and so forth. And all monopolies should be abolished.
Okay, if there are other questions. Okay, we have a question here.
Thank you. My name is Alessandro Barber. I'm also a member of this institute. I have a question for you. It is a recent trend about sovereign wealth funds. Sovereign wealth funds basically are state-owned investment funds that feed off earnings and revenues from state-owned companies that were nationalized and create boom and bust cycles in the international market, basically. What is your position about this trend?
No, I don't think things for pension obligations and similar things. So I think the sovereign wealth funds, I do not consider them to be a major danger. I wish, for instance, Germany would have a sovereign wealth fund. A country like Norway, for instance, has a sovereign wealth fund. Imagine that you have social security systems like in all Western countries where the pensions of people are paid by currently working employees. Pensions are not paid by people having saved up and then drawing down their savings when they are old. Old people get paid by people who are currently employed. If you have what you have in most Western countries, that is to say, life expectancy continuously increases, birth rates continuously decline, you can already anticipate that there will be a major catastrophe building up in the sense that they cannot pay the pensions that they are obliged to pay. I think some countries, at least in the Norwegian case, that seems to be the case, they build up these funds in order to be able then to pay their obligations to pension years when they can no longer do it out of the contributions that the current workforce is paying. So I must say there might be different forms of organizing these sovereign wealth funds in different countries that I do not know what the specific differences are in various countries, but I do not from the outset see a particular problem in sovereign wealth funds. In a way, it is an attempt on the part of criminal organizations to be a little bit responsible organizations. Instead of spending all money on current consumption, they invest some of it somewhere in the hope that they will be productively used, repaid, plus interest and so forth. So again, I'm not an expert on the construction of sovereign wealth funds. I would not bet my life on the correctness of this answer, but that is my impression.
Okay, we have another question over there. And then?
So, good evening. My name is Nicola Marian, so small difference from the France president. And I have a question about a news I reached 2 days ago about a possibility of an army intervention in Iran. It was a news released from the Israeli Prime Minister about an army intervention, a military intervention in Iran. What's your opinion about the changes that could occur if the United States or Europe or Israel would come to Iran? Maybe about the currency, the dollar, the euro.
Because then the pressure to engage in inflationary policies will of course even increase. They would have to fund these things. They would have to indebt themselves even more. I might make the general point that the central banks have, one of the reasons for central banks having been set up was that governments could more easily go to war. Look, wars must be funded. They must be financed. How can you finance? You can ask the public to give you the money for it. You can try to sell government bonds to the public. You can try to raise taxes. This all takes time, and the outcome is not is not certain. So you might decide, I can't go to war because I can't get the funding for it. If you have an institution that can simply print it up, well, let's say we lower the reserve requirements from 10% to 5%, you can double the money supply in one day. Then, of course, you can go to war. You can just pay salaries to the soldiers, buy tanks from the army suppliers, and so forth. So central banks are also dangerous institutions, even in this sense, that they may increase the likelihood of countries engaging in military adventures. Unfortunately, I'm quite concerned about this threat against Iran that we hear about, and this is one of the techniques that governments have used. They are in deep trouble financially and so forth. What is the best thing in order to draw attention away from this crisis? The best way is you create an even bigger crisis, because then everybody will of course talk, oh, will the Israelis use nuclear weapons? Will the Americans use nuclear weapons? Yeah, then the dangers that I described, inflation, state bankruptcies and so on, they become minor problems as compared with the problem that is brewing there. So governments love crises, frequently fabricate the crises in order to increase their power still further. Take the Iraq War. Obviously, Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with this 9/11 event. Nothing whatsoever. They did not have any weapons of mass destruction. It was just all a huge lie. Everybody knows it in the meantime. But the fact that 9/11 happened was, of course, a magnificent event for Bush, because he wanted to go to war before the public opinion was against it. Now you just have to invent some little stories. Iraq, Saddam Hussein, they had something to do. Al-Qaeda, who knows, he met them somewhere. And all Americans then are gung-ho about doing this sort of thing. I think the reports that the Atomic Energy Committee came out about Iran is on the verge of having a nuclear bomb. Who funds the Atomic Energy Commission? The main funders is the United States, and I'm sure Israel also funded the report. So they knew already what the report would say. And they want to have a report like this in order to create a crisis. There are numerous examples like this in history. We know, for instance, that President Roosevelt knew, because they had broken the secret code of Japan, that there was an impending attack of the Japanese Air Force on Pearl Harbor. But he did not warn the commanders in Hawaii that was going to happen. He wanted it to happen, because then he had the perfect excuse to enter World War II, which he always had planned to do, couldn't do without some event taking place, because the public opinion in the United States was opposed to it. As soon as Pearl Harbor happened, of course, they were all in favor of it. So I have, in many, many years of observing political events, I have come to the conclusion, first, whenever you hear some official statement, responsible government people, first thing, it's probably not true. Either it's because the people are dumb or they lie, unless there is clear-cut proof that it is in fact the truth. When you adopt this type of internal policy, by and large, you will find out that you tend to be right. Never without reservations accept what you are told by responsible governmental organizations. Most likely, it is not true. They also, your savings are safe. And my savings are not safe. We have everything under control. Germany is capable of handling these types of crises. Yeah, this is all a bunch of nonsense. So to just persuade a population that the governments in all countries continuously try to dumb down, and dumb down. I'm going to take one more.
So the last question then.
Hello, my name is Alex, and following the logic of your scheme and the money scheme, and assuming that history repeats, I think that hyperinflation is unavoidable, at least with the US dollar, maybe a global one. Some economists think that in 2012 we'll see high inflation, and in 2013 we'll see the first beginning of the signs of hyperinflation. When do you think it's gonna happen? And a second question, if you invest in precious metals.
Yeah, I have invested in precious metals for quite some time. I bought a sizable amount of gold when the gold prices were very low. That has turned out to be the best of my investments that I made. I'm not a good investor otherwise, but then I could see, it's like if you want to be a good investor, you have to follow the papers on a daily level. That's not my style. But I could see that since 1971, when the last tie to gold was eliminated and the entire world adopted pure paper money standards, that paper monies are in the long run a bad investment, and saw that gold was a good way to protect yourself against it. There were also times when the gold investment looked bad. So it was drastic fall in gold prices. So it depends a little bit also on your time horizon that you have. I mean, if you only live for 5 more years, you might think differently about it. On the other hand, if you have a longer time horizon, think also what do my kids inherit from me, then I saw that it was a wise investment, and it turned out to be true. What was the first?
When do you think that hyperinflation?
Oh, the inflation is already happening. It's like all of these inflation numbers that you get. They always take out those things where prices go up more, they drop them out of the basket for which they calculate, and those things where prices fall, they add them into the basket. There exist alternative ways of calculating it. There's some people have published statistics based simply on the way inflation rates were measured 10 or 15 years ago, and they say based on that there would be inflation rates already now of 10 or 15%. I do not think that they are out to create hyperinflation, because hyperinflation is of course the end of this type of system. So hyperinflation they do want to prevent under all circumstances. Because hyperinflation means that the central bank is powerless, can't do anything anymore. Nobody will take this paper. People will go back to barter. The butter will become money, or cocoa beans, or who knows what. So hyperinflation, they will make an attempt to prevent it. I'm not sure that they will necessarily always be successful, but I don't think there sits anybody in any central bank who says we should now create hyperinflation. But that there is inflation going on. We have not had a single year without any inflation, sometimes more, sometimes less. And you can see there are in the United States in the last few months, again, it's a drastic increase in the money supply taking place. And the new head of the European Central Bank, Mr. Draghi, was before a banker for Goldman Sachs. So it's always important to find out what did these people do before, what will they do after they are out of their job. So Mr. Draghi is also a tool of the Americans, a tool of Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs is, so to speak, the most influential investment company in the United States. In every American administration, government administration, there are Goldman Sachs people in there. And these banking elites have their puppets in all parties. For them, it doesn't matter whether the Republicans win or the Democrats win. Regardless of who wins, there will be Goldman Sachs and similar type people sitting in their administration and telling them what to do. Mr. Obama's power and Mr. Clinton's power and Mr. Bush's power is frequently overestimated. There are people in the background that are far more powerful than these figures. These people in the background laugh about the stupidity of those people that are their central figures that appear in the public and pretend that they are the ones make the major decisions. They have people surrounding them who see to it that they make the decisions that the major banking houses want to be made. Thank you again.